My name is Rob Wilkinson. I am a member of the remote forum that Patty leads. She had spoken to me earlier about kind of presenting and sharing a little bit of our journey in adopting something called EOS. I reached out and saw that there's a few folks who are within 7CTO who have some experience using it, but nobody within my particular group. So I wanted to kind of give an overview of it, but more importantly, tell you some of the details and challenges and successes that we've faced in kind of implementing it. So figured the best way to do that would be to kind of begin and give you folks sort of just a brief overview of who I am, what our company is all about, and a little bit of history. This may be new for some people here. Some people may already know this, but we'll kind of dive into it and go from there. So talk a little bit about the history, what an operating system is, why we picked this one, some of the pros and cons of it, and then move into some questions at the end here. So that being said, let's get started. So history of Oddball. My company's name's Oddball. We are an agency who works with clients, originally mostly commercial clients. As time has moved on, we've gotten more and more into the federal space. We've been around since 2015, so about 5 years. And right now we are just shy of 100 employees, but we should be 100 by the time this is published. Just to give you an idea of our growth and what we've kind of faced, on the left is the very first org chart that we ever built. Incredibly simple. If you can understand that one, you're great. The one on the right is where we currently sit right now, right? A lot more complex, and we just have a whole lot more going on than we did back then. So obviously we had to do something to kind of get from where we were to where we are now. And what I like to kind of get into when we talk about this stuff is to talk about systems, right? Every business runs on systems, but systems always break. And, you can get into systematics. There's lots of books that are written on that. But, you can, at a high level, systems are very simple in the beginning, right? For anything that you do, right? So a great example of this is kind of like a financial system. In the very beginning, if you're a one-person business, where does your financial system live? It probably just lives in your head. Right at the end of the month, you look and you go, okay, cool, this is how much money we made, and this is how much money we need to keep going. And it just sort of exists there. As things get more and more complex, right, that system doesn't really work anymore. And you move on to writing things down or using spreadsheets, right? And you sort of advance. Hang on a second here. There. Another great example is your work processes. We're a software development company. So in the beginning, working with our clients, we just sort of did the work that needed to get done. We didn't really have great processes for it. We didn't really do things. But, as you evolve, you move into, okay, let's start using Agile, or let's use Scaled Agile framework or something like that, right? As you sort of grow, your original system breaks and you have to find something else that'll kind of handle the new load. And then hiring process is another great example. In the beginning here at Oddball, we were mostly just focused on friends and referrals. We moved into using some local ads, and now, targeted recruiting. I need someone who needs these exact credentials, and there's 10 of those people in the US, and I need to get one of those 10, things like that, right? So, you have to sort of evolve your processes and get them better over time. But what about your business processes, right? We're talking about these different processes within these parts of your organization, but how does your hiring department communicate with your operations department? And how does your financial department sort of raise and escalate financial risk to the business, to your head of delivery or head of operations and things like that? A lot of businesses don't really have a system for that. And things get complicated, right? Things get really complicated. So what people have kind of come up with is this idea of an operating system for the business. The analogy I always use is that a computer without an operating system is just a bunch of plastic and metal, right, with electrons kind of running through it. But you need an operating system that kind of makes it work. So why do you need that operating system? Well, it kind of gives you a central place to point. Once you can't keep everything in your head, once you can't just sort of sit at the end of the month and completely understand your business and every part and aspect of it, you need to have a better way to run it. And every business has this. It's just an unwritten operating system, right? For example, maybe you have a CEO who it's a very command and control operating system, right? They micromanage things, and that's how the business runs. It's just unwritten. or it's very decentralized. Everyone just kind of does what they think is best at the moment. And there's pros and cons to each one of those systems, and there's lots of space in between those various systems. But rather than having an unwritten operating system that your business is using, there are explicit operating systems that you can find. So I put a few here. There's Scaling Up. That's one that you can find if you start Googling. There's a lot of conferences for them. Some people might have experiences with that. I believe it's called Gazelles. That's the actual system. There's OKRs, which Google really focused on, right? Set your objectives, set your key results. Every VP or department is responsible for a few key metrics here. And then there's EOS, which stands for the Entrepreneurial Operating System, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about, right? But just think about it. It's a way to sort of focus on the operating system of how the business works, not what the business is doing. So why did we choose EOS, and how did we choose it? Well, we worked with a consultant. We met a guy who had scaled up and sold his business. It was very similar to our business. He had done Salesforce implementations, and he used EOS and hit a lot of great success. We were recommended by a friend who said, hey, this has really helped my business to accelerate and sort of achieve outcomes. And then once we got into it, we found it was simple and it was easy to understand. There's two sort of intro books that go with it. One of them is called Traction. It's sort of a business, more of like the hardcore principles. And the second one is called Get a Grip. It's more of a fable style, kind of like, what's the other big one that you can get is 5 Dysfunctions of a Team and things like that. So it's more of a fable. So we read those and we found they were pretty interesting. We had a meeting with this consultant and we said, hey, this really clicks to us. There was a few key kind of principles in there that made sense to me and made sense to my CEO. We said, okay, this is something we can get behind. This is something we can wrap our head around. It's not overly complex. It's not over-engineered. So what is it? So this is the EOS model here on the right. And I'll kind of work through these different things. I don't want this to turn into just a pitch for EOS. So we'll kind of just hit on some of these key topics and go from there. So basically the idea is if all 6 of these components here, people, vision, data, process, traction, and issues are all firing on all cylinders, your business is going to be running great. You have all the tools you need to succeed and everything's moving in the right direction. So we'll go through them really quickly. Vision, where are we going? Right? You have to have that written down somewhere within your company. Hey, this is where we want to be in 3 years, 5 years at the end of this year. People are either on the train or they're not, but to have that written down and have everybody behind it is very empowering. The next one is data. How much money are we making? What's our defect rate, right? Like you have to be tracking key metrics that your business needs in order to succeed. Process. How do we do the things that need to get done? Right? What is our process for onboarding somebody? What's our process for hiring someone? What's our process for offboarding, for doing work? Right? Having those written down and documented so that way you have kind of a standard playbook that you can iterate on is huge. There's traction. The statement that people always like to say is vision without traction is just hallucination, right? In 5 years, I'd love to be a $100 million company. I have no idea how it's going to happen and I can't set any goals between now and 5 years. Sure, that's great. It's super aspirational, but you don't really get into what it's going to take to get it done. So it's all about bringing that vision down to earth and breaking it down to ways where you and the team can kind of achieve what needs to happen. Issues people think of as negatively. It doesn't have to be. Issues are just things that are happening in your business, right? Next quarter, we need to work and get this specific certification. Or, hey, we've outgrown our current financial system. We need to hire another big bookkeeper. Those aren't bad things. Those are great things to happen. It means you're growing, your business is doing well, but they are issues that you should talk about. And then the last one is people. They're all equally important, but you got to have the right people and they need to be in the right seats. What I always like to say is no matter how great your accountant is, if you put him in a salesman's role, she's not going to do very well, right? Like some people are wired to do a certain thing and you need to make sure you have the right people in the right seats. So this is kind of the EOS model, and how things get done within EOS is by using what's called the 5 foundational tools, which I'll get into here. So the first one is the Vision Traction Organizer, sorry. This kind of answers 8 questions for your business. It's what are your core values? What's your core focus? What's your 5 or 10-year target? Your 3-year picture, your 1-year plan, your quarterly goals, your marketing strategy, and problems that are in your business today. So it sort of lets you have one unified document that everyone can point to and go, this is what our company is all about, where we're going, and the problems that we're going to face along the way. It's very clarifying to sort of have everyone on the same page and walk away going, okay, we're all in agreement on where we're going and how we're going to get there. The second is an accountability chart. And you notice I said accountability chart and not org chart. And the key difference in EOS that makes the accountability chart very valuable is that someone can be in two spots. So, maybe your business doesn't have a full-time bookkeeper and CFO. You have a CFO who does two of those roles, but you're going to need a bookkeeper one day. That's fine. Have the responsibilities for that bookkeeper written out, have it in the accountability chart, and the CFO sits in both. It's all about sort of defining the responsibilities that you need done, and then finding the person that can achieve those responsibilities instead of finding the person and then catering the responsibilities to them, right? So you wouldn't have an engineer on one side of the company and an engineer on another side of the company with completely different responsibilities, right? You'd be responsible for the same things, just in different places. There's rocks, which are quarterly goals that everyone at the company sets, leadership team all the way down, kind of has to define their quarterly priorities that they want to get done. There's a meeting pulse. Everyone needs to be in a meeting, a regular cadence meeting where they talk about the business and what's happening. And then there's the scorecard, which is, what metric would you want to see if you were on a deserted island? The way that we kind of use it is if you were on a plane with no internet and you were going someplace for a month, what would you want to see to know if the business is doing well or not? And it's important that these are forward-looking, right? So an example is if you're just looking at past revenue, that's useful, right? That's valuable information somewhere, but probably more useful is seeing your future projections for the next month, right? So try to keep your metrics forward-looking. So these are the sort of 5 tools that power EOS. So that's kind of a brief overview of EOS. I want to tell you what Oddball likes about it and what we don't. So what we like, right person, right seat, RPRS. What that means is once you define the responsibilities for a seat, it's very easy to see if someone fits it or not. You just go, hey, do they do these things well? And do they perform well while they're doing it? It sort of takes the ego out of the issue, and you don't have to say, well, they've been here a really long time, or, well, they used to be really good. It doesn't matter, right? If the company grows and all of a sudden they're managing 10 people and they used to just manage themselves, that's a different set of responsibilities, and they're either the right person for that or they're not. And this doesn't mean anything bad, right? Like we've moved people who have been right people, but in the wrong seat and moved them somewhere else, right? Within the company that maybe it's a better fit. It gives this view gives a clear definition of the duties and responsibilities. So you don't have hurt feelings after the fact when something that you thought you were responsible for gets done by someone else, right? Like that doesn't happen here. I know what I'm in charge of and I know what other people are in charge of. And there's a big difference between saying, hey, that's not my problem, and, oh, that's Steve's job, right? And kind of empowering them to do that work. And EOS is all about that. The third thing that I really like is better, more productive meeting formats. EOS brings something called the Level 10 meeting that has a pretty strict template. Takes 90 minutes. You adhere to a schedule. There's a good portion and a good thing called IDS that you do when you're kind of working through issues, and it lets you keep things on track. I've also found it works really well with engineers who are usually a little bit jaded on meetings, to give them a very well-structured meeting that they can be a part of. The other thing is it takes out ego. When you get together as a leadership team and you go, hey, what are the top 3 priorities for the company over the next quarter? And you come together and you figure that and you go, who's the best person to tackle these priorities? And you divide them up, right? It's sort of company goal-based and not personal goal-based. And it's very numbers-based, right? You focus on having a scorecard every week that you can track, and then when the quarter was up, you either hit your numbers or you didn't. And these aren't always financial numbers, right? Some of these numbers are retention numbers or personnel numbers or number of defects or uptime and things like that go into that too. But it's all about sort of defining what matters to your business and adhering to those numbers. The other thing too is employees that really appreciate this transparency and openness. We share our vision traction organizer across the entire company. Everyone here at Oddball can kind of see what we're about, what our 1-year goal is, our 3-year goal, and our 5-year goal. They're on board, and they can kind of see what the company is all about instead of it just being a nebulous type of thing that veterans get and others don't. And then lastly is core values weave through everything. One of the first things we did with EOS is really define our core values. And EOS is great about using your core values when you're hiring, using your core values in your quarterly evaluation, kind of presenting them, getting them in front of your employees continuously, and really focus on making them something that your business lives and uses constantly instead of just some aspirational words that are up in your office building. So these are a few things that we like. What do we not like? We work with clients and customers who are used to org charts, and they're used to Scrum, and they're used to Agile. And sometimes the accountability chart can feel really clunky, right? I have to break up a team that's going to be working with the VA for the next year. I can't really convince my client what an accountability chart is and how exactly it works. They're used to org charts with colored boxes and things like that, you know? And that can be a little tricky to handle. So what we've taken to do is we have an accountability chart within Oddball, and then each individual project has a sort of a traditional org chart. It's a little clunky, but it works for us. The second one is sales predictions are hard. We have to define goals and targets for different things you want to achieve, and sales is tough to measure, especially in our business. It can be difficult. The third one, when we do there's a quarterly meeting within EOS. You get together for 8 hours and you sort of talk about what you're going to do over the next quarter. In person, it's great. I don't know if anyone here has been on an 8-hour Zoom call. It can be a little tiring. It can be a little tough. Not EOS's fault, but yeah, it can be challenging. And then lastly, I think overarching, a lot of EOS is about defining your processes and getting them done in a repeatable way. And that's tough to do when you're a small business, right? You may have only done a thing 1 or 2 times, and you have to kind of try to think about that and break it down and figure it and write about it in a way that's repeatable. And that can be difficult because maybe it was just a fluke. And I don't know if this is EOS's fault. It's just something that's been challenging for us, is to break down and define different processes that may just be one-offs. So just a few things that we don't like. And lastly, I kind of wanted to close and give you folks some resources to learn more. So if you go on Amazon, there's the Traction book, Get a Grip. Those are both pretty short reads. I'd also like to plug EOS Worldwide. That's a worldwide community. And then Shoot CXO here. That's our implementator. He's a guy named Josh. He lives in LA. He's really helped our business. If you want to learn more, I'm sure he'd be happy to chat and kind of give you some further information. But yeah, that's all I have. I'll open it up for anybody who has any questions.
No hurt feelings, you said, when you used to be responsible for something and now you're not. Sounds like fantasy rather than fact. Why aren't people upset when the responsibilities, rank, privilege are taken away and given to someone else, a peer or even a previous subordinate?
Yeah, it can definitely be a tough conversation to have with those individuals. I think it's a matter of good management that we've kind of done, where a great example of this is maybe you are a salesperson who's in charge of a certain sector, and as business has grown, you know, it's sort of outside of your grasp, you're overworked, and you're working like 60, 70 hours a week or something like that. Having the conversation with that person that's sort of like, hey, you used to be in charge of these 2 pieces, now you're going to be in charge of 1 of these, so you can really focus on that, and someone else is going to take the second one, right? It can either be they can sort of see it 2 ways, right? And I get what you're saying, right? Like, we have had to have those tough conversations too. It also has gone well, where someone's been like, okay, this lets me really focus on what I'm good at, and let someone else kind of handle this other piece that's not going so well. So I think that's more of a manner of good management.
I have a question around the accountability stuff also. Can you just walk through how you actually constructed it? Because that's like, I'm assuming you looked at functions and then associated names with functions.
Yeah, so 5 responsibilities max for each person. So when you boil it down to that, it's sort of like, well, what do you actually expect? So a great example of this is like, if I were to ask you, hey, what are your engineers responsible for? You'd probably come up with like 30 different things, right? But ours is, we boil it down to, it's a few things. It's writing code, communicating, tracking your time, and reporting on what you've done, right? Like those are the four kind of key components that an engineer needs to do in order to do their job well. So those are kind of the things that they're responsible for. If you're struggling in one of those areas, that's okay. Or like maybe you write a lot of code, but you're not that great about communicating, right? Or like documenting what you've actually done. You just need to get better in that sort of segment. So I guess that sort of forcing function of only 5 responsibilities really helped us a lot. And then you also make sure that you don't have this sort of weird hodgepodge where an engineer here is in charge of a whole bunch of things and another engineers over the other section of the business is only responsible for 2 things, right? Like all of our engineers are responsible for the same stuff, because that's broad enough where it kind of covers a front-end engineer, a back engineer, et cetera, et cetera.
So you actually do this down to the individual level then. Okay. I was kind of thinking about it more in terms of like who talks to vendors and like negotiates contracts and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So you've actually rolled this out for literally everybody.
Yeah, we do it for the high level too, right? Like someone will be in charge of, I'd be happy to kind of walk you through some examples if I had it up. But one person is in charge of the proposal process, and we have a tech writer who's working underneath them, and they're responsible for generating content for that process, right? So yeah, we do have it all the way up, including sales team and stuff like that. We even go as far as we use an outsourced CFO firm, and we have them on there with the things that they're responsible for. And our outsourced CFO hops in our meeting and it's like, hey, these are the things that you're responsible for, and we treat them like, and like we would anybody else within Oddball, instead of just sort of an external contractor.
I like the clarity this provides.
Yeah, it's really helped us. I was very skeptical, and I think that the accountability versus the org chart is the tricky thing. But it helps when you can have someone in 2 seats, because it sort of lets you proactively structure what you want things to look like instead of just reacting, right? So if you don't need a full-time bookkeeper and a CFO and a lawyer or HR person or something. It's fine. Just have a seat for them, and whoever's actually doing that work right now is in that seat and whatever else that they're doing. Hey, maybe in a year we need this person, maybe we don't. But it kind of telegraphs that this is what things are going to be or look like.
How long have you guys been using EOS? When did you start?
We started in May or February of 2018, so it's been about 2.5 years.
Rob, when you have the vision conversation, we had been talking about that a little bit earlier. Is that something that's continuous over the 2.5 years, or does it sort of change or alter every year? And how do you nail that one down? Like, what's the conversation look like?
What do you mean the division conversation?
The vision conversation, like the big umbrella vision.
Yeah. So obviously, right? If you're, well, maybe not obviously, but like your company focus of where you want to be and your core passion should hopefully not change every quarter or every week, right? Like people are signing up to work at your company because of something. And if I'm really passionate about going to the moon and you're really passionate about digging and drilling for oil, like we're both not going to be at the same company, right? So you have a chance once a year to adjust your sort of core focus and your niche, but you shouldn't really mess with it more than that. And ours evolved over time. In the beginning was, here's a great example of this. Our current vision statement is to, I should have it written down because we just had our annual and we changed it. But basically what it boiled down to is we had our old vision statement was about continuous innovation. And we changed it to continuous impact, to make an impact for our clients, right? Instead of innovating for our clients, to make an impact. And why did we do that? Well, we realized that, we care about innovation. It's a means to an end for us here at Oddball. Like, we're not just trying to go in and use blockchain and machine learning and throw out buzzwords just to use them. We'll use them if they fit the problem for what our client needs to get done, but we're all about making the impact that needs to happen. And sometimes that impact comes from building an API platform or doing some really old school ugly stuff, right? That solves a big hairy problem for the IRS or the VA. And it's all about making that impact. And even if it's not necessarily using the most crazy sort of next level technologies, right? And we also found too that it just didn't have the great perception, right? Because if you're an engineer and you see continuous innovation, you probably think it's something different than if you're a product person who sees continuous innovation. So that's a big change that we just made. But yeah, we had our once a year chance to kind of make that change.
So when you shifted to EOS, did you notice a corresponding increase to metrics like your growth, your profitability, employee satisfaction?
Yeah, I think there was, by employee satisfaction, I could say the leadership team felt a whole lot better. We got some better metrics overall too, because when you're dealing with executives or you're dealing with high-level hires and you can kind of tell them on day one or within the interview, you can go over some of this stuff with them. They know exactly what they're on board for. And I think there's a lot of companies who are out there who just kind of don't really have a system, or they've been lucky and they work really hard, and there's no real method to how they do things. And we found it's very attractive in the workplace to kind of go over this stuff within the interview and show someone the vision of where the company is going and explain some of the things, how it works. And it's actually, we've gotten some of our best hires who said, that's one of the big reasons that I signed with Oddball, is the fact that you guys have a system in place and I'm not sort of entering into chaos. I would say too, that once we got this done, all of the rapid and the racy stuff that we had put together for a variety of different processes and things that need to happen, like all kind of went by the wayside because this just explained it all. Right? Like there's no need to figure out who's in charge of pricing on a proposal because it's written right in the accountability chart and that person's in charge of it and they're the decider and they're accountable for it. If they screw it up, it's their, their heads on the line. They do a great job, they get the credit too. So
did anyone leave because you switched to EOS or was vocally unhappy with the choice?
We've had a few people who have joined whose old company used it and didn't really like it at their old company, but they've been impressed by the way that we've done it. But yeah, we've never had anyone who's left because of the change.
Who championed this internally?
Who championed it? I think it was a joint effort between me and my CEO. Like when we started with it, we were maybe about 15, 16 employees. So it wasn't like we were only a 2-person company when we started on it. And we just kind of like, we started slow, but we set good quarterly goals to kind of implement it and push it down. So by the time that we were around 35, 40, it had kind of become a part of the company culture. And now our meetings all sort of follow this format. And I will say that if you're using Agile and Scrum, right, we don't have that 90-minute meeting for every engineer at the company because they already have a retrospective every week and they have a sprint planning every 2 weeks. So they're already in a meeting pulse. It just, and it has a defined format that those teams use.
Is there a management hierarchy or structure under EOS? I wasn't quite clear on that.
Yeah, so there's an integrator who's in charge of managing the top level functions. And then the other person that you can have is a visionary who kind of sits above the integrator. And usually different mindsets, right? Integrators focused on like the day-to-day work that needs to happen and stuff like that. They don't prescribe a specific structure. It's just sort of figuring out what your business needs to run and make sure that those responsibilities are assigned to someone. So our business, we have an integrator at the top. Underneath that, we have the CFO. We have our chief operating officer, chief operating officer, and we have our VP of HR, right? And that's kind of like the top 3 things that our company needs. We need to make sure we're getting paid and we're in the green or we're in the black. Work's getting done and we're hiring folks. It's kind of like the big 3 functions of our company.
So if there's no clear management hierarchy, Then like a couple of questions there. Is remuneration tied to roles, and what happens when someone has more than one role or has moved from a role? And who makes the decisions relating to those roles, as well as reviews, remuneration, and raises?
Yeah, so you make the decisions for the people who are underneath you, who are below you.
So there is a traditional management hierarchy then.
Yeah, there is, but it's not set by US. It's something that I guess that. Sorry, I guess I misunderstood your question. We put it together. They didn't say, "Hey, this is what you need to do."
So you faded out just there, a little soft.
I said I misunderstood your question. We put the organizational sort of chart together, the accountability chart together. It wasn't like, oh, you need to have these specific roles.
Okay, so the accountability chart is an organizational structure as well.
Yeah.
Showing that these roles will have these roles reporting to it.
Yeah, you're accountable for the people who are underneath you, right?
So effectively, there's a traditional manager who makes decisions around who gets to be, who shifting roles around, remuneration. Yep. And how is remuneration handled when it comes to roles? If I get moved out of my high position, do I lose salary?
I mean, yeah, right. Like, it depends what you're doing. I think it's a case by case basis, right? If you get moved from, a very high level role and severely kind of demoted, I would imagine, yeah, you would have to deal with a pretty significant salary cut.
Right.
Yeah, we would
Yes.
have to do that.
Yeah, so EOS doesn't really cover that. It's something that you need to figure out how to handle on your
Yeah.
own.
I just wanted to know if you feel like this type of approach to managing the business is something that you'll outgrow, or like have you felt like you've started to outgrow it, or do you feel like it'll kind of grow with the company?
It's a really good question. Yeah, I think that we will outgrow it. I think we'll probably outgrow it in at around 300 people or something like that, right? When you're just so large, where you need to have a more traditional structure, right? When you're more vertical based, would probably be the way that I envision it. Right? Like the future for Oddball is like, right now we're one company that focuses on federal health, federal defense, right? But as we grow, we'll probably have federal health will look like a small company, and federal defense will look like a small company, and state will look like a small company, and each one of those will have VPs who function somewhat as mini CEOs, and you sort of fragment that way, which I think is what we've seen a lot in our space. But I think it's different space to space too, Matt. Right? Like that's just the model for a lot of federal contractors that seems to work, and it's sort of a tried and true thing, So
Right.
I imagine we'll outgrow it at a certain size, though.
Couldn't you just run EOS in each of those little companies then?
That's an idea. There you go.
Rob, thank you so much.
Sure, no problem.
That was really rich.
If you guys have any questions, let me know. It was exciting.